Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this evening. We got a couple of good friends on here tonight. We've been involved with these guys doing things for quite a while now, and they've got a few good stories. We thought we'd get them on here and let you guys hear their stories and learn a little bit about them. Guys, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Barry Coy. I live out by Elk City, Oklahoma. I started getting interested in Bigfoot back when I was about 13, watching the Patty film, and I was just glad they were so far away. I had my first really encounter. I knew what it probably was back in '83 when we were hunting, bow hunting, and that piqued my interest more. And then I had my first sighting back in 2014 of Bigfoot, so that really piqued my interest. I started doing a lot more research online, and then I started learning about these Dogman things, which I had never heard of other than movies. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then the type of work I do, I'm a radiation therapist, but I have a small oilfield service company that hotshot tools to rigs, and I go into a lot of desolate areas. And I started seeing the Dogman, and so I started to do a little more research on them. So that's kind of where it got me started.
I'm Rick Ezel, and I live in Elk City also. Like Barry, I was always interested in the unknown ever since I was real young. I never did really think anything truly about it. I was kind of like everybody. I thought, well, if they're really out there, somebody's going to find a body or something of a dead one. So I didn't really believe in too much, about it. And then I guess about 4 years ago, becoming this summer, be 4 years, I started riding with Barry on his hotshot runs. And he told me he was a researcher, and I told him, I said, well, you've never lied to me, and I said everything, but I'm one of those guys that I'm going to have to see one in order to believe it. And he said, okay, so start looking this way. I was a deer hunter, and I can find the deer in the trees real easy. But I wasn't looking for something 8, 10, 12 foot tall standing up there. I'm looking for a deer down on fours. Well, Barry told me how to start looking. Okay, that was this summer, be 4 years. I've seen 11 since then. And I didn't see them until I started looking, I guess you would say, the correct and proper way to try to look into the woods and find them. And it's been a joy. As far as Dogman, I always thought they were werewolves and they were on TV, and never even actually ever heard of anybody mention anything about a Dogman until Barry said something about it, and then we had a little encounter, so we'll get into that later.
Well, good deal, guys. Thanks for coming on tonight. We missed y'all on our last outing. I understand y'all have to work, and well, we all do. But yeah, we were wishing y'all were there, but we've got time to do some other things, and we just wanted to let y'all know y'all were missed.
Sure. Yeah, would have loved to have been there.
Oh yeah,
we were short-handed. I couldn't turn them loose.
Yeah, no, we understand that. Chuck, are you there with us tonight?
I am here, sir, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure being amongst you guys, for sure.
Well, hey Chuck, why don't you're the one that really got us all together. You mind jumping into that story real quick? Just cover any area you want to.
LJ, I think I think you contacted me, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'd heard you on a show. The show's not on anymore. That Cryptid PTSD. I heard your story, and it sounded like you were close to my area. And then I got to research and found out, sure enough, and then I sent you an email, and that's where it all started with us.
Okay, and Rick, I think you kind of tagged along with Barry, and I think Barry, did you contact me, or did I contact you?
I can't remember. I remember Sibylla told me to get a hold of you, Sibylla Irwin. And
right.
I'd had all those tracks out in the barn and had you come out and look at them.
Yeah, that's correct. LJ contacted me, and Barry contacted me and told me about what was happening out at his place, I made a road trip and went out to Elk City and met Barry and stayed the night watching and listening. Barry, you can talk about some of that evidence that was around your place. And I think the one piece of evidence that I saw with my own eyes that was pretty incredible was the aluminum bar that went around your chain link fence that had been pushed down. Barry, why don't you go ahead and describe that for us and for the audience?
Okay, it's the top rail to the chain link fence, and this chain link fence was produced back in the 70s, so it's really heavy. And it was a short end run. It was about 8-10 feet long, but it had been pulled straight up and bent it.
Right.
You could see the indentions of the thumb and four fingers where it grabbed it and pulled and just bent it up. I still have it. I found it after the tornado, and I've still kept it. We were having lots going on then. I was losing dog feed and couldn't figure out why. I was losing 50 pounds a week. Couldn't find any tracks in the dog runs because they were hard packed. But we just kept losing dog feed over a 2-year period, except when I'd leave the heat lamps on in the winter. Then it'd stop. Until that last winter, then I found a couple of branches thrown in and hit the heat lamps and broke the bulbs out. And I couldn't figure out how that was happening, which I found out later when we started finding the footprints and the handprints inside the barn.
Chuck, that's kind of where I stepped in then, because I'd been riding with him. He'd been talking to me about it, trying to get me into this group that everybody's in here. And so he called me up and said, hey, he said, if you're still interested. And I said, interested in what? And he said, Bigfoot. And I said, yeah. Well, he said, come out to my place right now if you want to see a foot. And I think I was there before my phone ever went hit back down, boy. I was there and went out, and I couldn't believe. I'm sitting there looking at it, that footprint in that hard pan and then in the dirt. And then he said, now look up above you. Good grief, I looked up there, and there's fingerprints where they tried to open that door, slide it, and the thumb and fingerprints. And that amazed me. I was hooked. I said, okay, I believe it now. Let's go. I'm ready to do it.
Yeah, that hand drag was like 7.5 feet high.
Yeah, I was going to say 8. It looked like it was 8 feet tall.
Barry, didn't you say one time that one slapped the side of your house and it shook you in the bed or something like that?
Oh, many times. But there was one night in particular that he hit the side of the house so hard that I bounced out of bed. My bedroom was the second floor. And I came up out of bed, and so did my 2 little schnauzers. And I thought it was an earthquake. And so I got on the website, and there was no earthquake in Oklahoma. So I called the sheriff's department and asked them if there had been an explosion out here. He said, nothing's been reported. And he said, what happened? And I told him. I said, but it's been happening every Wednesday or Thursday night for the last month. And he thought that was weird. So they were going to keep a patrol car out about that time every week, which I never heard anything from them. But then I was telling Chuck about it. And he said, have you got anything out that they can eat? I said, well, no. And he said, what about dog food? I said, oh, yeah. I said, I've been losing 50 pounds a week out of dog runs because I feed them once a week. And then he said, what do you have for get rid of trash? I said, well, I've got a dumpster. He said, when do they pick it up? I said, well, they pick it up on a Monday or Tuesday. Depends on how busy they are. And he said, when do you feed? I said, on a Saturday. He said, so by Monday or Tuesday, you're running out of dog food because they're eating it. And then Wednesday, Thursday, they're out of trash. And so they're coming up and hitting the house. And it's a brick house, but I put a lot of cement under that house, and I didn't have any bricks cracking. But we went out there and looked and found at 7.5 feet, the mortar was cracked and one brick was kind of crumbled. But over the year, we'd heard a lot of slapping, but that one was just tremendous. It just shook the house. Just couldn't believe how it shook the house.
I think the alpha was hungry, is what I think.
Yeah, I think they were out of. And then probably the spookiest night I had was I was fixing to get in the shower about 11:30, and something tapped on my bathroom window, and I thought, that's a fingernail. And then it tapped twice again, and I just hollered out. I didn't even know what to say other than, I'm busy, I'm taking a shower. I just blurted it out and didn't hear anything else until the next morning. I went out round back and looked at the screen on the window, and there was fingernail drags down the screen, and the window is at 7.5 feet.
Barry, describe real quick, if you don't mind, about your family that you have there. I'm talking about the schnauzers. They can key on to these things, can't they?
Yes, especially the little silver one, Sassy. She's the main one. And then my lab. So, of course, the first one I saw out here by the barn, she saw it with me. And ever since then, she locks up if they're around. And she'll just stand there with the leg up, just like she's on point. And I can shine a flashlight out there, and I'll catch the eye shine usually. But that night, the big boy is standing in front of the barn, about 150 feet from us. But ever since then, she's been really good. But the lab outside, now, he would come to the window and jump on the windowsill to get my attention, and then he would look whatever direction they were at. He would not bark at them. He was scared of them.
Barry, I want to ask you something. You remember, and I know you do, that time we met down on the Red River, all of us, and we had that outing in, I think it was August? Now, you remember that time when we had found that you had your thermal out, and we found that young one we thought it was? You remember what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Chuck and I have told that story, but I just would like to hear a third person that was there kind of tell the same thing, if you don't mind.
Alrighty. Because we came into this clearing, and we could see this kind of igloo-style hut of branches, and of course we could kind of tell that, what that was. That the Bigfoot had to have built it, but it was an area to me. When I saw it, I thought that looks like a perfect playground for the little ones to run up and down the trees and protection from that berm on the north. And the closer it got, I remember Chuck said that he was taking pictures of it, and he said, I see eye shine. So I got my thermal out and pointed in there. Well, I was getting a good heat signature, and it looked like something maybe, at least 3 feet tall. But what was strange, I could see it move, but I could see a heartbeat, or that's what it looked like to me. And it was very, very rapid on it. And then I had Chuck come look at it, and you come look at it. But, yeah, there was definitely moving around in there, and there was definitely something there. To me, it looked like it was around 3 feet tall.
Yeah, well, the strangest thing of all of that is it just vanished. I don't know how else to say that.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was there 1 minute, the next minute it was gone.
Yeah, because I was watching it, and it started getting smaller, and then it just disappeared. And, it looked like there might have been a den or a hole back in that dirt, that kind of a berm there. And, it may have went down in there, but it was filled in when we got up to it, which I've seen badgers do that. They'll go down a hole and back push dirt into it real quick. So I'm wondering if it did. But, yeah, it just disappeared.
Well, I was just going to say that is possible that it did that, but, I mean, I've been asked before what's some of the strangest things I've seen, and that one has to be on the top three, if not number one. I mean, we're all sitting there looking at this heat signature and, like you said, watching it move. And we come around to get physical eyes on it, and it's gone.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's getting smaller on the thermal,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden it's just gone.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think that left us all shocked. Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I was going to say, that whole area down there where this took place. I mean, we've had a plethora of activity down there every time we go down there, and one of my most memorable, well, there's actually two moments while we were there, was when we were all sitting around the campfire, and LJ, you was talking to D. Doss. D. Doss was sitting beside you, and you guys were talking back and forth, and the rest of us was just sitting around listening, and all of a sudden we see a blur go running past you and D, and I looked over at Barry, and Barry was looking at me, because I think you saw it too, didn't you, Barry?
Yeah, just a quick blur. But I just had a feeling we were around it.
And, you know, the other time that happened down there was, and it was the same night that took place, you caught something on your thermal, standing, I don't know, how far away was that from us, do you think, Barry?
Oh, started out like 60, 70 feet.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So LJ and D go running down there, and we can see LJ and we can see D down there, and they're trying to find it. They're trying to locate it, and we're sitting there watching the thermal up a pretty good ways, and we're giving them directions on where this thing is at, and I hear LJ say, "Well, where's it at?" And we're like, "It's right in front of you. It's not like 5 or 6 feet from you." And they kept trying to get closer and closer. And I think at one point, LJ, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually saw some movement in front of you, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
I mean, we were watching it, and I'll tell you what, Barry, I would have given anything if you would have had a SD card in your thermal at the time, because, man, that would have been some awesome video, because he was right in front of them, and he kept, the closer they would come to him, he would start backing up.
Yep.
And he'd back up a little ways, and he'd stop. And finally, he actually turned and went down towards the river, if I'm not mistaken.
He dropped down kind of out of sight until you all started coming back towards camp, and then he followed you back up to that stump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from my perspective, from what I remember anyway, I remember you guys saying that, and me and D going in there, and D was in front of me at one point, and there was a pile of brush, some limbs and stuff in front of us, probably about 10 feet from us. And all of a sudden, D comes running back behind me, and he's screaming, "It's a hog! It's a hog!" And so I grabbed the pistol on my hip, and I'm getting ready to draw it and light this thing up, because I thought it was coming at us. And then all of a sudden, I seen it move. It just stood up right in front of me, and I was like, "D, that's not a hog." and then it just, and I seen its face and its right arm and shoulder and pectoral muscle, and that's really all I could see of it. And it just kind of backed off into the shadows, and we were standing there. D and I both saw it, and we're just shocked that we actually walked that close. So we were within 10 feet of this thing. And like you guys said, as we came back up to the camp, I guess it came back kind of following us, but it was obviously pretty comfortable with us, because it's probably the same one that ran behind D and I while we were sitting there talking, the one that y'all just previously talked about, would be my guess.
Yeah, that's what I think too. But that thing, that one in particular was as tall, or maybe even a little bit taller than you guys when it finally stood up.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a great time. I mean, we went and seen some pretty amazing things on the Texas side that next day or the day after. I can't remember, but man, it was a hot week down there. I won't forget that.
I thought it was pretty neat when we that night that we found that hickory tree that had been broke over, and we knew we had some that were following us. And while y'all were looking at that, I was watching behind us on thermal, and I had that 4 sets of eyes that was watching us.
Yeah, I remember that.
Chuck came back, and I know D-Doss came look. I can't remember who all came and looked, but you could see them moving. I mean, They were moving around and looking at us, and then I stood there while everybody started walking off to see what they would do. Well, they backed into the brush and started following us again. And so then I caught up real quick.
Yeah. Didn't waste any time. Yeah, we've had some experiences, all of us, and we've had some good times, and sometimes that weren't as good, but I mean, we always enjoy each other's company, and we've been out on several outings and stuff together. And one thing that you guys have seen that Chuck and I have not is what you'd mentioned in your introductory is the Dogman.
You got that up there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we want to hear some of those stories. So whichever one of y'all want to jump into it, just go for it.
Well, I guess I start out with the first time that I saw them. We was going in this one location, very, very desolate. There's no homes there for 10, 15 miles, and I went 13 miles off the road back on this ranch to a rig. Been going in and out of there, and I've always had uncomfortable feeling. And then a mutual friend of Chuck and mine started telling me what he was seeing on that same place. He was going there at night hauling water. And so I told him,
Are you talking about our Marine buddy?
I think he is.
Okay.
And I'd seen signs on there. I thought it was Bigfoot marking territories. Seeing tree branches broke off along the edge of the road up at 8 and 10 feet high. I thought it was just a boundary they were marking, but I don't think it was Bigfoot because I've never seen Bigfoot in there. But anyway, this was during the day. It was about 11 in the morning. I got off location. I stopped to take off my heavy work boots, and I looked to the trees. Oh, they're probably 75 to 100 yards from me, and I thought, what's this sticking out of the side of the trees? And I realized, that's a snout. And I knew where my phone was sitting in the pickup, and I didn't take my eyes off what I was looking at, and I grabbed the phone and zoomed in and took pictures. And it was too bright outside to really see, so I got in the pickup and was come back home and got in the dark, looked at it. Well, I could see him. Just a big old muzzle and head and ears, and I could see the shoulders and the chest, this massive chest. And I thought, oh, shoot, that's one of them.
Yeah, let me look at that picture and said, can you see anything? And, oh, yeah, you see it.
Yeah. And, but then wasn't long after that, maybe a week or two, I was back in there, and it had rained a couple of days before. So I was just driving through that lease road looking at the shoulders to see if I could see any tracks. Well, I'd run across some cow tracks, and then all of a sudden I saw this strange track, and I hit the brakes and backed up and looked at it through the window. I thought, wow, I've never seen anything like that. I got out, and I got to looking at the track, and I thought, this track is not over 30 minutes old and probably less than 15 minutes old. Because it's real sandy there, and it was little mud balls off the sand that were still wet, and the wind was blowing like 10 to 15 miles an hour. I mean, it should dry out real quick there. But these were still wet and muddy. And so normally I've had my tape measure with me. I could have stuck it down there, but I was too busy looking around me to see where this thing was. But I took a picture of it. It was 5-toed, but it had nothing like I'd seen on Bigfoot. It had huge claws on each toe. And I've got a size 13 boot, and it was as big, if not bigger, than my foot. And I tried to push down in the sand beside it to see if I'd go as deep as it did. It was like 3 inches deep, and I went about a half inch. I wish I'd stuck that tape measure down, but I was too shook of what I was seeing. I knew that thing had to be close.
I was just going to say, I think you sent me a picture of that, didn't you, Barry?
Yes. I think both of them. The one of standing in the trees and then the track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you sent me a picture of I think you said you were on location and you had a glove on your hand and you put your hand down by the track, which is the same picture that I've got on this channel. Would you tell us about that, if you don't mind?
Okay, that one is out in the Texas Panhandle, and that was a guy from location took that picture. And this was out by their trash trailer. And he said he went out there one night to dump some trash in there. He said there was something big out there, and he ran back to the yard and didn't dump the trash, and went back out the next day and found that. So that that one is more of a dog style, but just huge. There was no homes even close to have a dog, especially one of that size, that even close to that rig.
Now, you mentioned the Texas Panhandle, and for people who don't know, it's not flat, but it's barren of trees almost. They're very sparse, few and far between. It's grassland. Is the other areas you're talking about, are they similar to that?
Where I've seen the most of them is it's grassland, but there's a lot of brush and trees, and it's rolling. And a lot of these trees have mounds on them. I mean, mounds under them. And, there's a lot of cover where I see most of these. But where I've seen them in the Texas Panhandle, and there's not much cover at all. In fact, I saw the most I've seen at one time that I could clearly see was 5 in one day. They were together running.
Yeah, I think you'd sent me a pin drop one time where you'd seen, I think it was those 5. And sure enough, it was a big cluster of trees up on a kind of a hill, and when I went out there and looked, but I never saw any tracks or anything.
Yeah, it was all grassland, and the grass was grown up pretty good, and I thought it was I could see a deer running, which I thought it was probably mule deer, just the color of it. Couldn't see it all until I saw him just as it hurdled a fence. When it hurdled the fence, its legs came out in front of it. Instead of like a deer, they tucked their legs. And then once it was on above the fence, I could tell what it was. So, oh, shoot, it's a dogman. And it hit across the fence, and it landed in the ditch, hit one bound in the middle of the highway, hit the other ditch, and jumped the other fence. And I'm talking, it's a wide distance between the two fences. He was about 200 yards in front of me, and I was driving 75. And time I closed that distance to where he crossed, I looked to see where he was at. Well, he was already 200 yards out there, and there were 4 others running with him, and they were kicking up a lot of dirt. And I've never seen anything run that fast in my life. Just incredible speed they had.
Could you describe what they look like?
This one, I had a pretty good look at it, but it seems odd, but it's shaped a lot like a buffalo. Not as massive a chest. It's just a big shoulders and chest with a smaller stomach and back end area. And it had a little more hair on the front end than on the back end, but it was kind of a grayish spot with tan, and it kind of reminds you of a hyena a little bit, except it's way bigger. I was in my one-ton Chevrolet four-wheel drive dually, and the top of his back would come to the top of the fender on the truck, down on all fours.
Wow, that's pretty tall.
Like, never seen anything run like that. It's just incredible speed. Just scary.
Well, Rick,
speed.
what have you seen out there with him?
I was riding with Barry one day, and we headed out. Was that about Shattuck somewhere out by in the Panhandle?
Almost Panhandle.
Yeah, we was almost out in the Texas Panhandle there. And of course, he pulls up there, and I'm sitting in the pickup, and I'm facing the west. Well, on the right side of me is a trailer house. Well, I can't see nothing, and I'm sitting right at the northwest corner of this pad. Well, there was another pad right west of it, but it was probably 8 feet or so dropped down because we were kind of up on a hill, and it had 4 tank batteries there. I'm thinking, way to go, Barry. I can't see nothing. I could see around them and kind of through them, a little bit. And at this area, you wouldn't expect to see anything there other than maybe a coyote or something. Well, I happened to look over to the west of me, and pretty good distance over there was a big old barn. Well, the two cowboys came in and picked up some trailers, and I could see them over there. They unloaded their horses. Well, they had 3 dogs, 2 German Shepherds, and the third dog was probably looked like a half German Shepherd and collie or something. It's a lot bushier. Well, they headed off down through that. Well, right in front of me, it sloped down. It was, like I said, I was on the hill, and it sloped down. Then there was like a bluff, maybe 8 feet tall or something, and then slanted back up toward the west. And it looked like a little creek had been through there, and it probably still was. Well, I see something walking through there, and I'm going, what the heck is that? And I'm looking at it, and I thought, wow, that's a big old coyote. Because it was dark brown and then tan colored. Well, it went between the last 2 tank batteries, and then it didn't come out on the other side. The dogs were coming down through that little valley, and when they got, I guess, to the point where they saw that thing, they tucked their tails between their legs, and they went back to the barn. Well, I could see the cowboys looking, they're leaning back behind on their saddles, wondering what was wrong with the dogs. You guys, let me tell you something. Those 3 big old German Shepherd and dogs look like little puppies compared to that one. You could have went from the front shoulder back to the backside toward his butt where the tail is, and you could have put 2 German Shepherds in between there. And that's not counting that thing's head and its tail. It was huge. Of course, I'm sitting there saying, I'm not seeing this. This isn't real. This is not happening. And then when Barry comes back, and of course he didn't see it, he was unloading. We're leaving. This is broad daylight. And probably, 3 in the afternoon, I think, because we had to run back to the city and then back out to that place again. And I'm telling Barry, so I'm trying to debunk this. I'm trying to say, well, the heat's got me at the imagination or whatever, And I said, it looked like when it was walking, I said, you ever see like a big wolf or something on TV that they're trying to make it look bigger, and you can tell it's kind of animated? He said, yeah. I said, well, that's kind of what it was, so I don't think I saw it. He said, hey, that's what everybody describes how it was. And I'm going, Barry, I'm trying to debunk this, and you're not helping, And I didn't want to believe I saw what I saw. And I mean, I'm looking at this thing, and did you ever look at that hill, how far it was?
Probably 200 yards.
Yeah, it was 200, maybe, 300 yards down to that deal. That booger was huge, and he was crouching. I guess he heard the dogs coming, and he was going south, and the dogs were coming down into that little valley, into that I guess he's heading toward that creek. And where this one came from, there was hardly any trees. Well, further south there were, and then back north, maybe 1 or 2 trees out there, and it was just open land. But it was rolling hills.
But keep in mind, this is short grass pasture. This isn't tall grass.
This
is
was
short,
not tall, no.
very short.
But I tell you what, after seeing how big it was, it's scary. It's fine. They're scary.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing that is so unique about y'all's sightings is you hear a lot of them, the sightings anyway, in the east, in the woods, but I don't know if I've heard very many of like out in the terrain that we live at. So I find that very interesting, and unfortunately I've not got to see them, but I've got reliable sources that have. So
well, that's why I was trying to debunk it, because I'm thinking there's no trees out here. There's nothing. Why would that be that big thing we were out through here? Those dogs, they never did come out. They went to the barn and they stayed in the barn. So I thought, oh gee, that's not helping matters either, because now when those dogs wouldn't come out, and they were pretty good sized dogs. I mean, German Shepherd's a big dog, but I never did see him again. I have no clue as to where he went or what. But I stayed in the pickup. Believe me, I wasn't getting out.
Yeah,
What's the
just don't-
closest y'all been to him?
35 yards, 40.
Well,
That night
well,
time.
that one night, it was about 80 feet from that one. Had a little one with it.
Yeah.
I pulled over a hill, and I saw this two little silver eyes look up at me. I thought, what is that? They're silver, but it was little. You know, probably 12, 15 inches off the ground, and looked up at the pickup, and then it took off and ran behind this dark spot. Well, then once it got beside the dark spot, it peeked back around at me and then ducked back. But then the dark spot raised its head up, and there was two big old amber eyes looking right at me. Well, I knew right then what it was. I said, that's a dogman with a pup. And I was about 80 feet from him, just off the road. And I slowed down. I was trying to grab my phone and take a picture, and I was shaking, and I was throwing my phone everywhere.
Well, tell them what you see with the lights.
You have to take in consideration, I had my light bars on. You know, I've got that one that's 1,000,000 lumen, and the other one's 250,000. And
Lights the countryside up, believe me.
I couldn't see real details on it, but I could see the shape and where it was at, and it was in some weeds, but there was no doubt what it was because it was big. It was crouched down, on its belly. But when I topped the hill, there was a herd of deer. And the way this place is, there's two abandoned houses there, and there's a stock tank. And I'd seen the deer come around and drink out of that stock tank. So I think he was teaching that little one how to hunt.
He's not a hunt.
He was crouched down like he was ready to pounce.
So when I said 35 yards, I was talking about the night we were coming on this, what is called Dogman Ranch. We was out in the middle of nowhere, no houses around for 10, 15 miles or further. We headed south, back out of there. And I'm looking to the right. Barry's looking to the left, of course. And he said, there's something right over there. And by the time I turned to look back where Barry was pointing, he said it was brown. He was gone. So I looked back to where my side over here because I had a funny feeling, and I looked, and there was a mound with that chinry oak trees in it. You know, if y'all have ever hunted in that stuff, where it seems like they grow on the mound. That brown thing, whatever it was, ran up through a little cow trail. You know, looked like a low spot there. And I'm going to say, Barry, are you seeing what I'm, Barry? And he's looking over there. I'm seeing these two sets of eyes. And then all of a sudden, they're so black, they're darker and blacker than the night. You can see them.
Yeah.
And they just started coming up from the back side of that little mound in the trees, and they just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I said, Barry, I see 5 black ones there. I said, that means there's 6 over there, Barry. And I mean, they got up, you could see the amber eyes looking at the top of these trees, looking out of them. And there was one, like it was down on all fours, was on the close to the ground looking. And then Barry saw some to the left side. By that time, I'm yelling, get out of here, get out of here. My 40 caliber pistol didn't make me feel very comfortable at all. So I was ready to leave.
Yeah, we had the lights directly on them, too. You could see through the trees where they were standing was kind of gray looking, but where they were standing was just coal black.
Black.
And that one that was laying on the ground, those lights were so bright on, they'd look up at us, and then they'd bring their head back down because it was just so bright. And then after I was there just a little bit, I noticed a couple of the big ones that were standing, their eyes started squinting, and I couldn't tell if it was because the light was hurting them or were they getting angry. And that's when we thought we'd better get out of there.
That's when I was definitely screaming, let's go, let's go.
They're not afraid of us. I mean,
they proved that.
Yeah.
They were coming toward us, and they were right at the end of that light. That light shines in front, but it goes 30, 35, about 35 yards almost out to the right. Yeah, parallel to us. So, I mean, it's covering a huge area, and they were right at the end of it. But it's like you said, the eyes would get real slanted, So we figure the light was bothering them.
Making them mad.
Yeah, and probably making them mad. Didn't want to stick around to find out.
Did they? I've heard reports that these things emit some kind of evil presence. Have y'all ever sensed anything like that?
Yeah.
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 That's why I whirled and looked back to the right. Because when he said it was running, I had that feeling, and I turned and looked, and that's when I could see those black figures coming up over the mound into the trees, and they were coming right to us.
Yeah.
Didn't like that part. They're kind of the King Kong, I think, of the area.
Yeah.
When they go into an area, because they're sure not afraid of humans.
I saw one night out there. The lease roads out there were very wide. I mean, you could put 3 semis side by side. And I was going around this bend, and I thought, is that a mud puddle up there? And I'm probably 150 yards from it. But my headlights on, and everything's lit up. But he was blended in with the lease road. That's pretty sandy up there. And all of a sudden, that mud puddle went to moving. And once he moved enough, I could see that he was upright on 2 legs, and he was huge. It's like he took up a quarter of the road. I didn't get a good look at him, but he went over and jumped over the fence where I couldn't see him. But what I could see initially, looking through trees, this thing was huge.
Barry, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Last summer, I believe, is when this happened. You sent me a photo of what definitely appears to be a dogman in broad daylight, and the photo was taken in the Wichita Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Tell the story behind that, and what actually happened that day, if you don't mind.
Well, this guy started texting me. He said he was down in the mountains looking for one of Jesse James' hideouts where there's supposed to be, gold. And he was aware of Bigfoot and Dogman. And he texted me, and he said, I think I'm being followed. And I said, what? And he said, I think it's Dogman. And I told him, I said, well, you need to get out of there. Veer out of there, get out of that area you're in. And he said, well, I'm trying to, but it's kind of rough and it's slow going. And he said, I know they're there. I keep hearing them. I keep seeing bits of, different colors moving. And then in a few minutes, he sent me that picture. And he said, this is what's following me. And he said, well, I asked him, well, how far away are they? Did you zoom in on that picture? He said, no. And he said, yeah, I probably was within 15 feet of him at one time. But he said, I think he's just pushing me out because he's not trying to bother me. And I said, yeah, he's probably pushing you out. And I said, just keep going. Don't make eye contact and just keep going. And he got out of there.
Didn't they have to come in and get him? Didn't he?
That was another time. He went back into another area and then got overheated, and they had to come in and get him out. But he didn't have an encounter on that one. But he was getting nervous about it.
Chuck or Larry, one of you were asked that question. I thought you was talking about, have you seen the photo Barry has of the company man took it, of that one walk?
Oh.
Yeah. That's up northwest of here. Have you got that one?
Yes, I do.
I said it's Chuck, and he had a series of shots, and this is the same ranch we've been talking about, a series of shots across the pasture of this thing crossing. And when you first look at it, you think, that looks like a cedar tree that the cow's been rubbing on the bottom of it. All that series of photos he had, it was definitely walking across the pasture. But since then, I've seen the same one. Rick and I were up there one afternoon, and we're going into location, and I saw this standing. It was out edge of a clump of trees, and I just got a glimpse at it, and I was telling Rick about it. I said, but I think it's a cedar tree. But I couldn't stop because we were just the backside of a hill, and I was afraid somebody would run over the top of us. So I said, we'll check it when we come back out. Well, we come back out and stopped. Well, that tree was gone. And that was probably 150 feet from us.
Oh, that reminds me of one that's similar to that. I forgot. I thought that the one that I'm going to tell you is what he was talking about. We were coming off of that, remember, off of the Dogman place again. We're just coming along there, and I just happened to turn and look. It was starting to get a little bit dark. It was, I mean, still plenty of daylight, but it was just starting. And I looked over, and I thought, wow, I don't remember that, because there was a little ridge leading down to a little pond there. And there was some trees and some brush. And I remember a brush was laying there. All of a sudden, I'm looking, and Barry will probably remember this when I started yelling, Batman, Batman, Batman. Yeah. And he said, what I said is Batman there. And he backs up and backs that trailer up. Well, by the time we get back there, he said, where's it at? And I said, it's gone. Something was down behind that little bit of a brush that made it big and was black looking, but it had its head up and it had ears that looked like Batman.
In the movies.
In the movie, Batman, you know, the black hood and mask that he's got on, exactly what it looked like. Small ears, and it was black. But when we backed up, it disappeared and it was gone. And that was on that Dogman Ranch. So that was that.
Oh, okay, I got to stop you guys right there. There's actually a place out there called Dogman Ranch.
That's what we call it.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, you got to be kidding me.
Well, that's what we've been calling it. Because that
makes a whole lot of sense then.
The last 6 months that we had rigs up there, it averaged out that I would see a Dogman 1 out of our 4 trips going in there.
Wow.
How many trips would you make?
Oh, 1 or 2 a week.
Wow, that's quite a big ratio.
Yeah. Yeah, I started keeping track of it and figured out 1 out of 4. I don't know if they did it. My pickup or what, but
Barry, let me ask you this.
Okay.
What do you think about that area is a haven for these things? It's not like what we would think of. I mean, because you look at Bigfoot stuff, and they're in the woods, they're in the mountains, and there's lots to cover. I mean, these areas that you guys are seeing these things on are wide open areas.
Well, there's a lot of cover. There's the big, what call it, Shinry oak and sumac and little scrub oaks, and they could lay flat and you wouldn't see them.
Yeah, there's a lot of cover in this area.
Yeah, there's a lot of sand plums out there too.
Yes,
lots of sand plums, lots of deer, turkey, quail, rabbits, coyotes, and cattle. I mean, there's huge cattle ranches.
Well, not to mention the antelope, mule deer.
Yeah.
Yep. I've seen the antelope out there.
And it's desolate. There's that. How many acres that ranch have?
Well,
it went clear up to the next highway.
It was at least 10 miles wide. And I don't know how deep it was, but
it went clear almost to the river. Remember that?
Yeah.
Down to that river. It's desolate, and nobody lives out there.
Yeah.
Nobody for miles.
And you don't see the ranchers out there at night checking cattle or Kevin or anything.
How close is this to Pack Saddle?
Just north and east. But we're seeing them even west of the highway too.
So this
area. You know where that disposal plant is? One road, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one that go east.
You know where that disposal plant is? Just north of where you go into Pack Saddle there?
North of Pack Saddle Bar?
Yeah. How many miles? 5?
It's 8. I think it's 8 miles to that saltwater disposal.
Well, and back east.
You know, you took me into that area, and I've kind of been through there before, and you would think that there's really no cover for them, but in fact, there's a lot of ravines and valleys up and down through there. Yeah, there's, I mean, they do have plenty of places to where they can hide if they have to, or run to if they have to.
Yeah.
So, as far as what they could eat and stuff like that around there, I didn't think about the antelope or the mule deer or the deer and the hogs, but yeah.
Well, and that's not to mention Black Kettle, which is southwest of there, and that's massive in itself.
It is, and that's where we had our first Bigfoot encounters. But I have heard of Dogman encounters, in that same area.
Barry, you and Rick, why don't you guys tell us about the time you guys went hunting out there in that area, or pretty close to that area, where you heard stuff, and Rick, I think you even said you thought you heard samurai chatter while you were out there.
But both of us did.
Yeah. Well, we were sitting there the first night, getting ready to go hunting in the morning, and we're sitting there around the campfire, and I looked up. I bet it wasn't 20, 30 feet, maybe 20 something. I said, Barry, this possum's eyes, do they shine red? And he said, what? And I said, well, look. And there was eyes, and it was up the side of there's trees there, we knew. So that we figured that was a Bigfoot looking around. And see, this is what I was going to ask you. We can look back, and I want you guys to think about it too. At what I know now and what you know now, can you look back on your life and know that you encountered one? Because now Barry and I know that was a Bigfoot thing. Then we get up in the morning, and I go out tromping out in the woods out through there, get to this tree I wanted to be in, and I got to the tree, and I'm sitting there, and I hear this people chattering just about daylight. I'm looking around, and I can't find nobody, because I was going to send the arrow their way. I was mad. And the branch popped, and right in front of me there was a little mound, had it was a plum thicket. And that's why I said I was going to stay there. Well, laying on the other side was a buck. He jumped up and ran. When that twig, or sounded like a pretty good sized limb, broke, popped, and he was gone. And I never did look around and see. And I don't know whether that was Bigfoot trying to sneak upon that deer, knew that deer was there, or if they were just didn't want me to get it and kill their meal, But it was chattering right. Oh, I'm finished.
Oh, what did the chatter sound like?
I don't know if I can do it or not now. Something similar to that.
Very interesting.
Sound like Tasmanian devil.
Yeah.
It sounds what?
Tasmanian devil.
Yeah. Well, see, I was at my grandson's house at Prague. They had a little fire thing they do and stuff, and I went back to the house, and I was feeding the dogs and stuff, and then they were going to come back later, and they had this little puppy. So I let it outside, and it's dark, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. And he lives right on a corner, and right south of him and southeast of him is just thick trees. Well, I got to tell you about that one too. And I heard that same chatter, and I went, ooh. And this little puppy is like 6, 7 weeks old. It stopped, raised, and looked that way, and come running up and got on the porch with me. Finished his business, and we went in. And so this last Christmas, now this is the first time this has ever happened to me. They started, when I went back there at Christmas time, I looked over there, and they were clearing right straight south across the street from my grandson. But it was just thick briars and just thorns and stuff. And they were leaving the big trees, but they were clearing this out. So they left to go to her grandparents to have Christmas. I was heading back there. So I'm loading, and it took me 2 loads. I was just taking my time, And I looked over, and about the time I looked over, I thought, well, my grandson's pickup is there. And I thought, he usually takes that with him in case there's a fire, because he's a volunteer fireman. And about that time, I hear, hey. Well, I had looked straight south over there, and I saw something that was black over there, and there was a couple of other blacks there that I thought were just evergreen trees. There was 3 of them, in fact. And I thought, well, that sounded like my grandson. So I went over and looked back around, see if he was behind the pickup hiding from me, and just told me he had left, and he hadn't left. I couldn't find anybody. So I got in the pickup, started to back out. Well, I backed out, pulled down to the driveway of the road. I looked up. There's only 2 black spots over there. So I backed up into the driveway, backed up, and looked where I was standing. And I got out and stood and looked. And there's only 2 black things standing there. So I'm assuming that was a Bigfoot. And he said, hey, at me. Because he wasn't 150 yards away from me, standing there where they cleaned back. The brush was back about 150 yards from where I was standing. And I thought, oh my goodness, now I've heard one speak. You know, that was my first. And while I'm right here, that summertime, I told my nephew about that. Because they have a little baby. That's my first great granddaughter. And I said, I told him about Bigfoot, but not to tell his wife. So anyway, we were down on the river south of Seminole, and then back east a little ways. And we had there was 13, 14 people in 5 like Can-Ams and Rangers. We was riding up down the river down there. Well, we'd stopped out on a huge sandbar, and it went back east, and then it angled back a little bit northeast. It kind of made a little curve there, and that was a huge sandbar. So we sat there, and we were eating and snacking, and of course my eyes are roaming. I'm looking everywhere, and I looked up. I'm sitting in there, and I went, oh crap, that looks like a Bigfoot looking right at us. So I called my nephew over, and his name's Jacob, and I said, Jacob, come here. I mean, my grandson. I said, Jacob. Yeah, I said, you know, I've been telling you about Bigfoot. Yeah. He said, yeah. And I said, I'll tell you something. I'm going to get you to turn around and look over there. And I said, see it where it looks like a doorway kind of going back into that salt feeders and that thick brush and stuff over there. And I said, there's 2 black objects there. I want you to look at the one on the left. And he looks at it, and I said, do you think that's a tree? And he said, well, it's kind of funny shaped. I said, well, go to the very top and look at that big round head and those broad shoulders. He turned around. Won't say over this what all he said. He was and he said, you're talking about that? And I said, no, don't point. And he blocked me of the view. So when he turned around, I said, let's go over and look. I looked up and I said, hey, before we go, I said, look back. He looked back and he says, they call me Baba. He said, oh, Baba. Okay, he was going crazy. He said, he's gone. He said, that was a Bigfoot. And he was shook up, boy. And that thing wasn't 30 feet in the brush. 30 feet right there at the deal. And so my grandson got to see his first Bigfoot. And it was just sitting there watching us. We went over. My daughter said, what are y'all looking at? I said, oh, dear. Because I didn't want to scare them. So we go over there, and we look, and he's looking up, and he looked at me, and he said, wow, that thing's big. I said, it's bigger than I thought it was, too, because we couldn't tell till we got over there, and then we could see the height. And I thought, he said, you going in there? I said, no, I'm not going in there. I said, that's too thick. So we left. But it was huge. I mean, tall. Wow. Yeah. We weren't 30 feet, well, maybe 40 feet from it. And was just out on the sandbar.
The first time I heard one that I knew was that same hunting trip. Of course, I'd heard the samurai chatter, and as I got back to camp, I told Rick that there were some Asians down there that trail, and the same thing he had heard. And I heard a whistle, and then a huge tree snapped that next day. Huge branch just snapped off. And I heard different things and saw what looked like a nest, a huge bed made out of, brush, and trees broke off. Couldn't figure out what it was on that. But that evening, that'd be Saturday evening, it was sun was just almost down. And back to the northeast, I heard at first what I thought was this guy calling cattle. And I thought, man, that sucker's got a set of lungs. But at the end of the call, it did a loop. And I thought, that's ape. I thought, Paul Harvey's right. He had said twice on his shows that there had been Bigfoot sightings in Ellis, Dewey, and Roger Mills County of Oklahoma. And I thought, that had to have been ape sounding. And plus, it was so loud. But it did it twice. And then the next day, next day is when I found those tree markers. Those evergreens broke off at about 10 feet high, and they all pointed to the northwest. And but then that Sunday night, about 3 in the morning, when I got woke up by the loudest roar I'd ever heard.
I didn't. I slept through it. Didn't hear it.
I don't know how I slept through it. But it vibrated my chest. We were in a pop-up tent trailer, and it was incredibly loud. And it reminded me, the closest thing I can come to it is an African lion roaring, mad, and then a T-Rex, but take out the squeal.
Very good description.
It was angry, he was close, but he roared, and then about 100 yards to the north was a female scream, and she screamed twice. And it was just a blast. It wasn't a pitch, didn't have any pitch to it, it was just a solid blast. And I've had people say, well, you sure it wasn't mountain lions? No, I've heard mountain lions since I was 6 years old. These have put mountain lion to a shame. I've been 50 feet from a tom that just let out a humongous squall. And now I've heard two, either we were fighting or mating. I was 6 years old when I've heard them, and I can still hear them to this day. It's nothing like a mountain lion.
Well, let me ask you, on the same line, in the same hunting area there at Raiden, have you guys ever heard a siren go off out in the woods? Yeah, there used to be the farmers back in the 40 years ago, they had a little hand crank, and it was a siren. They'd put it on the back of their and it called the cattle in. Well, we were sitting there and getting ready to go. I guess it was noon or something. We was grabbing something to eat. We hear this siren go off northwest of our camp, and there's a wheat field up there. I said, "Dadgummit, Barry," I said, "let's go. We'll go have a piece of mind, tell that farmer what, because he's supposed to have the cattle off by October 1st, or actually before." So we go marching up there, and there's no cattle, there's no farmer, there's nothing up there, just that siren. Okay, now let's come to a little present a little bit. I had a lease down by, it's Highway 30 east of Eric, and they go south about 17, 18, 20 miles, and then back toward the Texas border. I had some land over there. I heard the same siren going. Now, this is before Barry and I started doing the research. And my son said, "What is that?" And I told him what it was, and I said, "It's a farmer calling cattle." Well, one weekend I'm there, and my son wasn't there, and I saw one of the farmers that lived there, and he helped us a lot and told us about the cougars and everything that's in there. And so I asked him, I said, south of here over there in that half section over there, I said, "Is there a guy over there that has a siren to call up his cattle?" He said, "No," I said, "we can't figure that out." I said, "We don't know who's doing that." Well, now I know who's doing it. But it was Bigfoot, because it had canyons, huge trees, and plenty of water.
Tell them about what the name of that canyon was.
Oh, well, the other place I hunted And I never even thought to ask them, but it was called Booger Holler.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
And see, I heard some screams and stuff out there. I'm sitting out there in an hour before daylight, sitting out there in the tree, freezing my behind off, and I'd hear these screams and stuff. Of course, I'd raise around to listen, and I'd make noise, and I'd think, well, I missed it. The wind's messing with me a little bit. Now I know that was Bigfoot. It wasn't. I thought it was a mountain lion or something like that, screaming. It wasn't.
Right.
I know now, after I've heard them scream. So that's what I was asking you. Have you guys ever been where you look back in your past and realize that at the time you didn't know it, but you were around, or there was Bigfoot in the area? Have you ever had any incidents like that?
Yeah, I'll tell you about an incident. It was really before I got into this. You remember a few years back we had a really bad, well, I'd say wet spring, and the Canadian River was flowing over. It was, all the rivers were flowing out of the banks. It filled up ponds in one day, filled up Foss Lake about a foot from the capacity in one day. Well, I had decided to get a kayak and go up north of Tologa on the Canadian River, and I was going to go all the way to Thomas, which I did wind up doing that. It's about 32 miles, but I had a good time on that. But that first night, well, it was the only night, I'd paddled down probably about 8 miles, found a good place to pull over, make camp, because it was getting late. I was finished dinner and everything, and I was settling down. I got in bed. Oh, I dozed off. I don't know what time it was. It was so dark out there. It found me, it was a cedar thicket, basically, I'd camped next to. It was good shelter just in case it rained again. But something lit off. Oh, it was probably 50 feet from me. It let out a scream that I have never heard before in my life. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I had no idea what it was. And then the next thing I had heard after that was a crow. It called and then flew off. And I was like, well, I've never heard a crow make a noise like that. And as I've gotten into this, I've heard audio that was very similar to what I heard, but it wasn't no daggum crow. And yeah, it was 50 daggum feet, and I hadn't seen a Bigfoot, and heck, I was a kid last time I'd seen one. And I sure didn't know they made noises like that. But that was just east of Tologa on the Canadian River.
Well, see, that's where I saw one. I saw one Bigfoot Saturday. I'm going across that Canadian River, going to Oklahoma City, and it was foggy that day. And it was probably 10:30, 10:45 or something. And it was starting to lift a little bit. And I always look down the river because I've spotted black things standing beside the river down there. Well, I looked down there, and I normally look at the very far end and then move back as I'm going away out of sight of the river. But this time I didn't. I looked closer, and then I looked up. About the time I'm getting close out of sight. There's one down at the very end where it made a bend and a turn, and it looked like his foot was up. He raised it up out and was stepping up out of the water like he'd crossed that river and was going over on the heading the southwest out of there. And I went, oh my gosh. And so I went on. Well, I come back later, and I made sure I headed back home, that I would be there in daylight, plenty of light, and I did. And I looked down there, and there's nothing there. It's gone. There was nothing. I thought maybe there was an evergreen tree there, and it couldn't have been a cow because it was vertical. It was up and down, straight up and down, and it was big.
I'd seen one in that same area a couple of years ago. He was standing on a sandbar. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Well, that's that same Canadian River. If you go on the west side of it, that wheat field, that's where I saw that. The first one I saw that I didn't know what I was looking at. You remember, Chuck, when I told you I thought it was a big raccoon?
Yes, sir. I remember that.
I could see the quills on it flopping. I thought, that can't be a porcupine. They don't move that fast. Well, then later, I was riding with Barry 3 months later or so. There was a big old semi, a grain truck parked there, and I went, oh, Barry, you're right, that was a Bigfoot. Because now I had a perspective of how big and what the distance was. And that truck looked pretty small out there, but whatever was coming across there looked pretty big. So they're in that area, right in there.
Oh, yeah.
I was riding my four-wheeler down there on the river last year, and I went up high up on the bank, get away from the water, just to kind of see what's up there, because there's no fence for a long way in there, and this is over by Thomas. And I'm riding back, let's see, I was going west. Well, I got up on this ridge. Well, it wasn't really a ridge, it was just a bit bank, sand, and I come across about several 13, 14-inch tracks that had walked the whole length of that thing. They were old tracks, but I've been down there on that river a lot of times in that area, and I'd never seen any sign of them. And seeing that, it hit home that, wow, these things are pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I got something to add to your story. I did a personal investigation over in that area, and they are there. I can't go into details. I mean, I can if I'm not live, but
yeah,
they are there. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
I've got one more Dogman story that this happened just about 2 months ago. Wasn't locally. I was out at Hobbs, New Mexico, and I was about 30, 40 miles southwest of there, out in an area, completely desolate. A lot of drilling activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I got out on location about 11, 12 o'clock at night and unloaded tools and loaded back up and was pulling off location. And on the lease road, there was kind of like a terrace I had to go over. But on the other side of the terrace, I see this thing come out of the brush, just strolling across the lease road. And, of course, I had my lights on. And I thought, is that a mule deer? And the closer I got, I thought, oh, it's not a mule deer. It was a Dogman, and he was large. They shaped like the same ones I saw up there in the Texas Panhandle. But he just stopped and looked right at me, just like no big deal. I was about 150 yards from him when I first saw him. But what was really creeping me out was when he turned and looked at me, there was no eye shine. It was just black right where his eyes were. And he was large. I was in my Ford F-350 four-wheel drive dually. His body was the width of the pickup. If I pulled right up to him, he was tall enough he could have set his head on the hood of the pickup.
On all fours?
On all fours.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But another strange thing was there was a coyote following behind him. Now, he looked at me for a minute and then just walked on in off the lease road. But that coyote was sniffing the ground behind him, just back and forth. Just, wow, that's strange. And I was close enough. I pulled right up to the coyote, rolled down the window and hollered at him. And he just looked up at me and stuck his nose back down. And I'm not 10 feet from him. And, this thing was not afraid of me at all. And
coyote wasn't either.
No. And I get back home and where I took the tools, and they said, well, did you have an uneventful trip? And I told him, no. And make a long story short, I finally told him what I saw. He looked at me and he said, I'm not surprised. He said, because they told us, whatever you do not leave the location or go out hiking at night because there's something out there.
So they knew.
They knew something was out there, and they were told to stay out not get off the location. And when I got off location, I was 150 yards from him, and they were fracking. I mean, there was lots of lights and lots of activity, but he didn't care.
Well, let me ask you guys this. What are you, as far as the Dogman goes, what are your personal opinions on him as far as friend, foe, threat, just whatever. Why are they here? What are they doing? Anything like that.
I just sense evil from them.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're Nephilim. I really don't know. It's just, they're a strange animal, and they sure aren't afraid of us. Most Bigfoot, when I see them, they take off running.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, these two that and looked at us and walked right toward us, even in the nighttime with the light shining right up to them.
Yeah.
They wasn't afraid of us. So as far as that, I've heard several things, Chuck, and I'll talk to you in person about it, but not on the air. But I'm like Barry. I'm not sure what they are.
Yeah, it's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, see, I've been retired from UPS now 10 years. Okay, thanks to a herniated disc, too, in fact. But I was about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, coming along there, and I looked up, and I was on Highway 34, heading toward Carter and Mangum, out west of Elk City. And I'm coming through there, and I looked up, and went, oh, bull. I'd forgot there's a big old chug pothole in the road that the state hadn't fixed, and of course I hit it with my right front deal, and how it bottoms out and sounded like it hits the frame, and it went boom. Well, I was coming up right on an area where to the left of me a road went west, but it was a dead section on the east side of the road because I was headed north. And I looked up and I thought, dadgum, I didn't know there was any hyenas out here. And there's this big-looking hyena running out across there. And I mean, you ever see a javelina pig run? Well, that's about what it was. That quick, it was gone. I mean, here and 60, 80 feet away in about 2-3 seconds, it was gone. And I went, wow, I thought I saw a hyena. But it had the big shoulders up front, and the lower back part was, the hips were lower, and he was black, dark looking, he was running. Well, later, Barry's telling me about this, that it was a dog man, and I've looked. You know how big a hyena is? The German Shepherd's probably bigger than a hyena. And I went, that was not a hyena, because that thing was huge. And that was right there with it was close to, it come up out of a little, where the road used to be, it was more like a ditch now, but it had brush and stuff in it, because it was a dead section going through there. It come up out of there, and across the road was like 3 houses, and then north was maybe 2 more. It's around 5 houses in broad daylight. It was like 4, 5 in the afternoon in the summertime. So that's plenty of daylight. So they're either getting pushed out of their area or they're getting braver. I'm not sure which.
Jose, I got a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Can you tell the story that you heard from that area, or is that something that needs to be confidential?
No, I can tell that story. I actually told that to D when he had his channel going, and he put it on his channel. But I'll go ahead and tell it, because Rick, you weren't too far from where this story allegedly happened. Down in Mangum, I'll tell where it is, it doesn't matter. Now, there's a Salt Fork down there just south of Mangum. Y'all know where that's at. And I had a friend that was from Mangum, and his name is Mark, which doesn't really matter, but he told me a story one time. He grew up in Mangum. He said they used to go on the river a lot. Well, let me back up a little bit. He said there was this family, and I know the family he's talking about that lives in Mangum. He said that they were always a little odd. They were kind of antisocial. They just did things differently. He said that one of the girls that was his age from this family was sat in front of him in school. And he said he would always notice hair running down the length of her spine. and and it would like come out of top of her shirt sometimes, and she would always wear like turtlenecks and stuff like that to cover that up, apparently. But he said he was down on the river one time. He saw this girl, and she was walking a little bit of ways from him, and he said just right in front of him, he said she changed into a wolf and took off. And well, he said when he came upon her, she was undressing. And he said she wasn't that good looking, so he was a little uncomfortable, it's like, what did I just walk into? And she progressed to undress and transformed into a wolf and took off. Well, he didn't say exactly how long, but he said later on, there's only one grocery store in Mangum. And he was walking in as this girl's mother was walking out. And they passed each other in the doorway. And he said she stopped, turned around and looked at him and said, now you know our secret. Keep it to yourself. And that was it. So, it was. I didn't think anything of that story when I first heard it. I was like, well, yeah, that's interesting. But now that I'm kind of into this stuff, it makes me wonder.
See, I've heard there's dogmen, and then there's werewolves. Like she was a werewolf that change. Dogmen don't. So whether that is or not, I don't know. But let me tell you, my grandson, when I told him about Bigfoot, I said, "Whoa!" I said, "You wasn't surprised or anything?" And I said, "This kind of got me a little off guard." I said, "What's the deal?" He said, "I didn't laugh at you. Will you not laugh at me?" I said, "There's no way I'll laugh at you. Don't you ever think I would." I said, "What happened?" Well, him and three other boys, there was 4 or 5 of them, went down on the river, and they go down at night. You know how it is. They say they're fishing, but they're down there drinking, But they did. They fished, too. But they was down on a sandbar nest fishing in this deep hole. Full moon was out. Okay, now if you're looking south, the full moon would be about 10, 11 o'clock, up that way. He said all of a sudden, they hear a woof, woof, and it sounded like wings. And they said, "What the heck?" And they looked up, and with the full moon, you can see. They see a man that looked like an owl with wings flying and went right between them and the moon and flew off. Said about 4 swishes of the wings after they saw him, he was gone.
That sounds like the Mothman.
Yeah. I said, "Well, what'd you guys do?" And they said, everybody just acted like they didn't see anything and never said a word. I said, "You didn't say anything?" They said, "No." He said, "But I did say it to this one guy," and this one guy said, "I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it." And he was scared, wouldn't talk about it. That is why people aren't saying as much about Bigfoot. But I think with all the shows that are on, people are starting to talk about it more. Mm-hmm. And they're starting to say things about it because they're finding out other people are interested. They're not laughing at them. They're not making fun of them. But these boys, I said, "What's it? Describe it." He said, it looked like a man's body with a owl's head and eyes and feet like an owl and big old huge wings. And he said, "We don't know where it came from unless he was on the other side of the river and he took off running and jumped and started, flying."
Some of the Indians talk about the Owlman.
I'd never heard of it. Never had. Have you guys? I've heard of Mothman, but not Owlman.
Okay, there's on the Cheyenne and Arapaho reservation, there was a guy that I got a story from. He was out there on the res during the night, and he swears up and down that he saw what he described as a gargoyle.
Ooh. That could be almost like an owl man too. And
yeah, could be. So that's kind of interesting.
I'll tell you a story that I grew up hearing. I grew up in eastern Oklahoma, Cherokee tribe, that's what I am. And my grandpa used to tell this story. He said back in the 30s, he used to be a square dance caller. And Grandpa said he used to, go around all over the country there, and that's one thing he did for money. But he said he was told the story, and he knew the people that did it. He knew them well, or the story that this happened to. But anyway, as the story goes, there was an Indian man that lived there, and he was what Cherokee call shapeshifter, and I think they call them other things in different tribes. But he was apparently having an affair with one of the local men's wives. Well, Grandpa said he seen the man at the square dance that evening. The guy went home. It was probably about midnight. Now back then they didn't really. None of them have vehicles. They rode their horses and mules or whatnot. But anyway, the man's coming home, and the wife sees the horse coming down the road because he was carrying a lantern. And back then, instead of flashlight, they had a lantern. But anyway, the guy was there, so he jumps up and he takes off. Well, about 2 or 3 in the morning, this farmer is woken up by a screech owl, I think is what Grandpa said it was, out on his corral fence. It just kept carrying on and carrying on. Well, he grabs a shotgun, steps out on the front porch, shoots it, and he hits it and feathers fly, and he said it falls out in the pasture, out there in the paddock. It flops around a little bit and it quits moving. He's like, all right, I killed it. So he went back to bed. Well, it had been 2 or 3 days from that time since anyone had seen this Indian guy around. Well, his family found him dead in his little log cabin from a shotgun wound. He'd bled to death.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was known to be a shapeshifter. So it was. I grew up with that story.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one real quick, and I actually have a picture of it. There's a grave down in Anadarko, in the cemetery, and the gravestone is from the 1800s, and the caption on the tombstone, and I'm not kidding you, it says, "Killed by human wolves."
I've seen that picture.
Really?
That is
Yes, sir.
on I got a picture of it.
That's in Anadarko?
I believe
The
so.
city cemetery?
I don't know if it's in the city cemetery or the Indian cemetery that's there.
Well, that's the thing about Anadarko. The city cemetery is the Indian cemetery.
Oh, is it? Okay. I thought there were 2 different cemeteries there.
Yeah, there's other ones, but there's Indians buried in all. I mean, there's not one specific Indian cemetery because Anadarko is basically all Indians anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I can't remember who sent me the picture of the tombstone, and I'm pretty sure it's in Anadarko.
Well, I know what picture you're talking about. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah. So.
Back when I was a kid, I'd go visit my grandmother in Arkansas, and she lived as you're coming in town on the highway, just about 2 blocks off the highway, and it was the very first street at the beginning of the town, and it went on south and then curved back east. Well, right across the road, we went there next summer, and it was all trees, and we'd play in those trees. Well, they'd cleared it out and put a light pole there, and was going to put housing in there. And then block and a half on further west, back west, across this empty lot was a Pettigene Creek, I think is what they call it. And he went all the way around through there. We played and went through there all the time. But when it'd get dark, my grandmother she'd get a hold of me because I was the ornery one. I wouldn't mind. I kind of had a mind of my own. I'd do what I wanted. So she'd get a hold of me. She said, "No, Rick," said, "stay in the light." Because we were playing a little like baseball. So they had one of those big outside lights, like a street light, and it was right there, and it'd light up that whole little lot there. There were several lots. And she said, I said, well, she said, "Rick, I know you don't," said, "the boogeyman will get you." And I laughed, and she said, "I'm serious." Said, "Stay in the light. Do not go into the dark." And she shook me and said, "Do you understand me?" Said, "Do not go in there." Said, "The boogeyman will get you." Well, good grief, I'm 9, 10 years old. She's scaring the pee out of me, so I wouldn't go. I stayed out in the light, But now I've often wondered, because that's what they used to call them, boogers or and I'm wondering if the boogeyman was the same thing they called that. And she was I'm pretty sure she was almost full-blood Indian.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah.
you know what they call those lights? Booger lights.
Really?
Yeah,
Really.
that's what they call them.
Well, Rick, my grandmother used to tell me the same exact story, the same thing, and I was like you. I didn't really believe it until I had a sighting, and then I started believing her.
Yeah. Makes a believer out of you real fast. Well, I tell you what, I don't mind seeing the Bigfoot, but I've seen way too many dogmen more than I would care to see.
Yeah.
I'm not so thrilled about that, and it doesn't bother me if I don't ever see another one.
Well, guys, we're coming up on a little ways here. We'll go ahead and start wrapping it up. Chuck, you got anything you want to add to all this?
Great show. Appreciate Barry and Rick coming on and telling some of their stories, and I hope you folks that are listening enjoyed them. I love all these guys. They're all like my brothers to me. We've done a lot of research together, and I've had some really good times. I mean, we got other stories that we could tell you that happened to us, but we'll save that for another time. But I just want to thank you guys for coming on the show with us.
Enjoy.
All right, Barry, how about you?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Nope, just enjoyed getting to visit with y'all again. We don't do it often enough.
That's right.
And
Yeah, that's for sure.
Bigfoot and Dogman, they don't think there's very many of them around, but there's a whole lot more around than they realize.
Yeah, well, what about you, Rick? Any final thoughts?
Hey, I appreciate you inviting me on, and it's good to hear you and Chuck talking and everything, so can't wait till we meet in person and have a few more stories.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. And we've got a lot more stories, like Chuck said, we can talk about, but we'll save those for some other dates. But we'll go ahead and I'll say the goodbyes. But well, thank you guys for coming on. We've really enjoyed your stories, your experiences, and we look forward to hearing from you guys again.
Thanks for inviting me.
I enjoyed it.
Yep, you guys are welcome. Well, Chuck, I'll let you close us out.
Well, folks, again, thanks for tuning in to us, and we hope you enjoyed the show as much as we did. Getting together with some guys that we research with and part of a group. We love what we do, and we do it for a reason, and that is to present the truth to you people. And some of you folks who have had sightings or encounters and you'd like to come on the show, be sure and contact us. You can reach us on my mind just went blank.
It's cryptidsafari@gmail.com.
Thank you for putting that out there. But anyway, if you've had stories or encounters, be sure and call us and talk to us if you want to. And if you're suffering from your experience in any way, shape, or form, give us a call. You don't have to come on the show. We'd love to talk to you and try to help you out. That's our main goal, is to help people through their encounters. So if you got a story to tell, give us a shout.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you've experienced a cryptid animal in any way and want to tell your story, email us at cryptidsafari@gmail.com. You're welcome to come on to the show or just simply talk to someone who will listen. We're here for you. Remember to be kind to one another, seek the truth in love, and He will make you free. Until next time.